using Scrum lipstick on a waterfall pig. A problem that I see over and over and over is that so-called agile teams aren't actually agile. This is so common, and it really hinders organizations from getting the true benefits of agility. One of the root causes of this problem is confusion about product backlog items versus definition of done, and how that relates to what people traditionally think of as requirements. So in many organizations, you have some people who generate a list or a spreadsheet, or using some other tool, a list of requirements. These are things that people need or want, and they're all related to some central theme, a project or product outcome, a business result, maybe cost savings, new generation of revenue. We want to use an agile method like Scrum or Kanban to get meaningful feedback from customers. So how do we do that? Well, we have two different types of feedback loops. The first feedback loop is about the product, the thing that you're building, the artifacts, the benefits, the results that you're trying to deliver to customers. The second feedback loop is about process improvements, how a team does its work, how the organization supports the team. These two feedback loops are very important to understand. There's a relationship between them, and they also have important independent aspects. The product feedback loop is where you demonstrate something to customers, potential customers, and in that feedback loop, you want your customers to be able to give you meaningful feedback. What do I mean by meaningful? It means that whoever is the product owner or responsible for organizing the work of the team can take that feedback and change direction. For example, a customer might say, you know, that thing that you're showing off right now, that's actually going to hurt me. Please, can you take that out? The product owner of a Scrum team should be able to say, yeah, you know what? No problems. We can take that out. What would you like instead? Get some feedback, more meaningful feedback about alternatives, and implement it. Customer feedback needs to be meaningful in that it can have an impact on the future behavior of the team and the future form of the product or service that's being built and delivered. Process improvements, on the other hand, are more internal. These are things where the team itself doing the work or stakeholders of the team can say, hey, you know, have you thought of using this tool to make your work faster? Have you worked on developing this skill so that quality goes up? These are things that are related to process, and with process improvements, we always expect them to be incremental. With product feedback, we may actually end up reversing course and remove something from a product or service that we thought would be valuable, but turns out isn't. There's actually 5 different ways that this relates to product backlog items and the definition of done. And this will help you master deciding what goes in the product backlog and what goes in the definition of done. This is such a critical set of constraints and guidelines to help you decide what goes on the product backlog and what goes in the definition of done. So first off, optionality versus requirement. If something is optional, in other words, if the business or the customers can say, yes, maybe we want this, maybe we don't want this, then it's on the product backlog. Every product backlog is an option for what to build and ultimately what to keep in the product or service that you're building. On the other hand, requirements are not optional. They must be there no matter what in order for your product or service to be effective, successful, and so forth. The next constraint is about independence. Items on the product backlog must be independent from each other. That means that you can put them in a particular order and your team can do the work and build things in that order, or you can switch the order up. And when you switch the order up, it does not change the level of effort for the team to do those items. In other words, if you have product backlog A and product backlog B, it doesn't matter which order you do them in from an effort perspective. On the other hand, if your product backlog items are not independent from each other, then it's possible that one or more of those product backlog items actually belong on the definition of done. Definition of done items in general are not independent. Instead, all of your product backlog items depend on a definition of done item. Another way to think about what goes on your product backlog versus what's in the definition of done is about additive value versus cumulative debt. When you implement a product backlog item, it should add value to your product or service. On the other hand, when you don't do a product backlog item, it doesn't harm you. It may not open up opportunities from a business perspective to not have it, but it doesn't actively harm you to not add something from the product backlog. On the other hand, definition of done items actually are those things that if you don't do them and you delay doing them, the cost increases over time. This is a really important concept, that you create a cumulative debt the longer you wait to implement something on the definition of done. In other words, if in your first sprint you do something, and second sprint you do something else, and third sprint you do a third thing, and then you realize, oh my gosh, we have to do something that's going to go back and affect all those other things, that means you've been accumulating debt by not doing that fourth thing. The fourth way of figuring out whether something goes into your product backlog or your definition of done is the concept of customer recognizable value and feedback. Customer recognizable value is something that your end customers would look at and say, yes, I want the team to work on this. I would be willing to pay for this either on its own or incrementally with other things. And in which I can, like as a customer, I can provide that feedback. On the other hand, definition of done items are often all or nothing. If you have them, you can deliver value. If you don't have them, there's no value. Many definition of done items are visible to the customer, but they don't have that separate incremental customer recognizable value. The final thing is about releasability. And this fifth constraint is a really important one for determining between product backlog items and definition of done. Every single product backlog item should, in theory, be independently releasable. In other words, you can give it to a customer separate or in combination with any other product backlog items. On the other hand, definition of done items are all required in order to release. So let's talk about, for example, some sort of website, and you want people to be able to pay for your product or service with different payment methods. The typical payment methods that we might look at include credit cards. What else is typical? Well, there's not many other typical methods for paying online, but there are some others. It's rare, but some websites allow you to pay with cryptocurrencies. So let's look at those two options. First of all, are they optional? Well, you have to get payment somehow, but you could start with either one. The concept of payment is a requirement, but how something is paid for is optional. Are they independent? Absolutely. You could implement crypto first and then credit cards, or more likely the other way around. and there would be no real issue about the sequence in which those get built into your product, into your website. Do they add value? Okay, absolutely. Credit cards are probably going to add a whole bunch of value because lots of people use them. But there are those people who are interested in paying with crypto. And so, yeah, that would add value as well. And releasability. Very likely you have to have payment to go live. But what type of payment form you take is not a requirement. Let's look at another example. Localization. So in case you're not familiar with it, localization is the process of taking a product or service and making sure that people in different language and cultural areas are able to access and understand how to use your product or service. I'm based in Canada, and we have 2 official languages, English and French. If I'm building some new product in a new industry that isn't regulated, I might choose to initially release my product as an English-only version. There are more English speakers in Canada, and from a marketing perspective, that might make sense. On the other hand, there are some industries where I must release in both official languages. I must serve my clients in both official languages. And so we can look at that and we can say, well, if I want to expand my market with a new localization, okay, I've got English, I want to expand my market into the Canadian French market, I'm going to localize into French, then that's a product backlog item. On the other hand, if I must comply to regulation, then that is a definition of done item. Same item, localization, but it could be a backlog item or a definition of done item, depending on why you have to do it. Again, I just like to really come back to this core idea. Not all requirements become part of your product backlog. In fact, probably many requirements do not. Instead, everything that's on the product backlog must be optional. It must be independent from each other. Each item must add value that the customer recognizes and can give feedback about. And each product backlog item must be independently releasable. So what's the problem with getting this wrong? Because of course, many teams are, using Scrum lipstick on a waterfall pig, and, they might be getting some improvements. Well, probably the biggest issue is that getting this wrong creates massive delays due to dependencies. The concept of the definition of done versus the product backlog helps to separate out dependencies and manage them appropriately within the Scrum team. Also, very commonly, when you have all your requirements in your product backlog, there's very poor customer and market results because you end up having a very rigid plan for delivering your work. You must do this first, and then this, and then this, and it causes lots of delays getting to market, getting into the hands of customers. On the other hand, if you get this right, you dramatically increase the agility of your teams. They can respond quickly and effectively to every bit of customer feedback that comes in, and they can carefully isolate out all the different process improvements they need in order to make delivering to the definition of done as quick and efficient and as effective as possible. So you get massive productivity increases, great time to market increases, much better customer results because of the feedback loops, and you actually end up much closer to real agility.